Hey everybody. So this is going to be a little video lecture over plot and structure, and like always I'm going to be using The Outsiders as my mentor text. So our objective for this lesson is going to be identifying the author's purpose and using the passage of time in a novel, because we've seen probably by now that our authors don't write most stories to take place in the course of a day. There are some stories that do that, but most will have it take place over a series of time, and we're going to kind of talk about why they might choose to do that. The question that I'm going to be modeling answering is how much time has passed throughout the book? Where does time move the fastest, the slowest, and why did the author write it that way? Before we get into talking about why an author might choose to do this and my example in The Outsiders, I do want to take a second to kind of talk about your basic plot map. And so by now, most of us have seen and we've done some work with this before. So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail with it. Get my drawing here. So we all know, so you'd start down here, you'd go up, you go down, and then remember, you always end up at a higher level because there's been some change, right? So we know the 6 essential parts of a story. So there's the exposition, which starts down here. And that's where we're seeing a lot of setting, we're seeing a lot of character introductions, we're getting an idea of the world that the story is written in. And then we have our inciting incident, which is right at the crux there. I'm going to put number 2. And that's the thing that kickstarts the conflict of the story. So a character has done something, and now like we're on our journey. This big long section here, that is our rising action. That's where we're seeing the conflict begin to cause more issues and things are getting a little bit more complicated. We get to the peak, which is our climax, number 4. My handwriting's not the best. That's when our character has to make a pivotal decision. So it's either going to go one way or it's going to go the other way. The kind of common misconception with the climax is that it's the most exciting thing to occur. It doesn't always have to be the most exciting thing. Often it is, though. And then, immediately following that, things have to start getting tied back together. So we've got our falling action, number 5. And then we've got our resolution, the very end of the story, where, and everybody lived happily ever after, that idea. So that's kind of our basic outline. We're not going to talk too much about that, but you will see, especially when we kind of go back to our question of like how much time has passed throughout the book, we're not going to have a lot of passage of time in the exposition. It's traditionally right here between 2 to 4 that we're going to have the most passage of time. That's when our characters are out on their journey. They're, going through the stages. They're having to get stronger to fight whoever the antagonist is. So you're going to see that the examples that I have chosen are going to fit right here in the rising action. So we've already seen the inciting incident. We haven't gotten to the climax yet, but we're, making some developments with the characters. So let's go ahead and jump right into the textual example. I'm going to talk about both when time is passing really quick and when time is passing really slowly. So I have an example for both, and I'm going to kind of give a preface to when it's taking place. So our first example is going to be really a good example of like when time is passing slowly, because the author wants to be very deliberate with setting up what's happening. So what's happened at this point in the story is that Johnny and Ponyboy have kind of fled town. This is right after the big inciting incident of where Johnny stabs the Soch, and they're like, we got to get out of town. And then Dallas is the one that kind of helps them get out of town. So you're going to see that Johnny's not going to be present in the scene for a little bit, but we're going to have a lot of mentioning of time, and we're going to talk about why that would be. So I sighed and I went to the pump to get a drink. The water from it was like liquid ice, and it tasted funny, but it was water. I splashed some of it on my face, and that woke me up pretty quick. I wiped off my face on Johnny's jacket and sat down on the back steps. The hill the church was dropped off suddenly, the hill the church was on dropped off suddenly about 20 feet from the back door, and you could see for miles and miles. It was like sitting on top of the world. When you haven't got anything to do, you remember that in spite of yourself. I could remember every detail of the whole night. but it had an unreal quality of a dream. So we kind of have our first mentioning here of time. So let me get my writing device. So I could remember every detail of the whole night. So it had just happened. So, and he's going to say in the next line, it seemed much longer than 24 hours since Johnny and I had met Dally at the corner of Pickett and Sutton. Maybe it was. Maybe Johnny had gone a whole week and I just slept. Maybe he'd already been worked over by the fuzz and was waiting to get the electric chair since he wouldn't tell where I was. Maybe Dally had been killed in a car wreck or something, and no one would ever know where I was, and I'd just die up here, alone, and turn into a skeleton. My overactive imagination was running away with me again. Sweat ran down my face and back, and I was trembling. My head swam, and I leaned back and closed my eyes. I guess it was partly delayed shock. Finally, my stomach calmed down, and I relaxed a little bit, hoping that Johnny would remember cigarettes. I was scared, sitting there by myself. So we have another mentioning of time here. So it was only 24 hours have passed since what Johnny had done by killing the Soch. And so the reason already that we're seeing this is S.E. Hinton is really trying to show how paranoid and how worried about this situation Ponyboy is. So she's kind of making the time seem a little slower to draw out that tension to really give us some suspense about, okay, what's going to happen now? So we're going to kind of jump down here a little bit. So this next section is going to take place just a few pages later. And this is going to be a really good example of when time just passes really quick, like when the author is like, all right, we're going to blow right through this. So the next 4 or 5 days were the longest I've ever spent in my life. We killed time by reading Gone with the Wind and playing poker. Johnny sure did like that book, although he didn't know anything about the Civil War and even less about plantations, and I had explained a lot of it to him. It amazed me how Johnny could get more meaning out of some stuff in there than I could. I was supposed to be the deep one. Johnny had failed a year in school and never made good grades. He couldn't grasp anything that wasn't shoved at him too fast. And I guess his teachers thought that he was just plain dumb, but he wasn't. He was a little slow to get things, and he liked to explore them once he did get them. He was especially stuck on the Southern gentlemen, impressed with their manners and charm. So like the text above, we kind of have a mentioning of time here. So the next 4 or 5 days were the longest. So the reason why the author might choose to do that is because maybe there's not a lot of interesting stuff that's going to go on there. So really in between, where we had left off in the few pages later to now, there was not a lot worth mentioning, so it wouldn't be really interesting to read about them sitting around and playing poker and sitting and reading from a book, like reading a book within a book wouldn't be too interesting. So that's why an author might choose to use that passage of time there. So I hope this video helps. Make sure that you're using these as kind of a guide to help you putting these ideas into practice when you are reading your own novel.